Doo-doo. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Really Bad Reading by someone who's barely literate. We are still going through Matter of Mayhem, Book 3 of the Matter of Mystery series. Matter of Murder, Matter of Mayhem, Matter of Malice, it's a matter of fact. These are all local stories, and other than the few books that I know a couple people around here that own, I don't think there is any other documented recordings of these videos anywhere. So you can check out the playlist for other really poor readings of these stories, but we are going to be going over The Disappearance of Asa Crawford today, as well as a couple other fun ones with some lovely artwork, don't forget, by the local high school students of the early 90s. All right, let's get to it. The Disappearance of Asa Crawford, Yarmouth Town, November 9th, 1912. Asa Crawford, well-known colored man, had been missing since Saturday. He went out for tea that night, and nothing definite has been seen or heard of him since. His hat was found on Water Street, near Burley Johnson's, by his son Lemuel, Sunday forenoon, F-O-R-E noon. A pretty thought search of the waterfront had been made, and several rumors of him having been seen at various points had been provided, to prove to be groundless. His family are very anxious about him. Yarmouth Times, November 12th, 1912. The mystery of Asa Crawford's disappearance has remained unsolved for 81 years, since he vanished one night from Yarmouth streets. Very little has been done to determine what happened and why. The police at the time tended not to investigate cases involving visible minorities with the same vigor as those involving white residents. Very little media attention was focused on Crawford's disappearance. This was probably due to the severe discrimination that so often plagued the blacks of Yarmouth County in the early part of the century. In fact, the only other report concerning Crawford was a very short sentence in a later edition which read, "Still no sign of Asa Crawford." But what happened on that fateful Saturday? There are not many residents left who remember Asa Crawford. After all, it has been 81 years since the man disappeared. It is known that Asa Crawford and his family lived on 5th Lane, which is now known as 5th Street. Crawford was married and had several children, with at least one living at home on the day he disappeared. His home was a simple 2-story home containing 4 bedrooms, a front room, a den, and your typical washroom and kitchen. This type of home was very common to laborers who lived in the area. It is believed that Crawford brought home a modest income, barely sufficient to support his family. Some they say that Asa Crawford was a common laborer working along the waterfront or various odd jobs around town. On Saturday, November 9th, 1912, Crawford left his home and proceeded west along Gas House Lane towards the waterfront. The most prevalent rumor of the day was that he was grabbed by about 3 men who were staying on a ship tied up at one of the wharves near the old Burley Johnson factory, which is known as Kennebec Fisheries today. This is supported by the fact that his hat was found on the wharf by searchers shortly after his disappearance was reported. Yeah, I'm going to rub my eye a bit more. Tilt, damn you. There were a number of vessels in the port that day. One of the stories suggested that the murderers were crewmen from a coal transport vessel that had been offloading coal for Burley Johnson's iron foundry. The vessel in question is believed to have had a primarily French crew. There's a space there nobody put in. It is believed that after the man had grabbed Crawford, he was severely beaten and possibly beaten. A possible motivation for his action for the senseless act of violence brought on by a combination of Crawford's color, alcohol consumed by the men, and frustration. It is believed that Crawford was taken back to the vessel and that either died as a result of his beating or shortly after he was taken back to the ship. I'm sorry, camera angle's bad. It is possible that he could have been beaten some more before he finally died. The crewmen, worried about their fates, set about to cover up their foul deed. There are several theories about what happened next. The first theory holds that a crewman took Asa Crawford's body, tied it down with weights, and threw it off the side of their ship into the murky depths of the harbor. The second, rather unlikely, because the water gets fairly shallow near the old iron foundry wharf, and as a result it is fairly easy to see the bottom. Even if the ship left port shortly thereafter, it would have been quite easy for investigators to locate the body, either by dragging or by examining the waters near the wharf. Local historians suggest that Crawford may have been murdered by local men and that his body was buried somewhere along South Street. It has been suggested that he was beaten by a number of white men and that they merely dug a hole and placed him in it. The problem with this theory was that someone would likely have either seen the beating or at the very least the men digging the hole, considering the fact that Crawford's family lived just a short distance away. Another, more plausible theory was that Crawford's body was thrown into the coal bin in the ship and covered up. After the ship left port the next day, the murderers would have been able to dispose of the body by dismembering it and burning it in the ship's boiler. A final theory was that the body was dismembered at sea and thrown overboard. This would have resulted in a little or no risk of identification of the victim. Whatever theory is closest to the truth, one thing is certain. Asa Crawford disappeared from his home early Saturday evening, November 9th, 1912. His hat was found on Burley Johnson's wharf, suggesting that he met his end near there. And finally, his body was never found. A research check of the ship's movement in the Yarmouth harbor showed that the following ships were in and out of the Yarmouth port during the time of Crawford's disappearance. Steamer Guiana, Guana, from St. Croix in the Caribbean. The steamer Sika Doris M. Pickup from Pataguash, Pascagoula, Pascagula. The steamer El Vala from North York, the steamer Matanis, and Louise M. This is why it's bad reading. Morangus from Port Arthur, and the steamer Cartagena, Cartagena, under the command of Captain Zappa Smith from New York. Of these, the only ship that could have had a French crew were the steamer Guana from St. Croix in the Caribbean and the steamer Sika Doris M. Pickup from Pascagoula? Yeah, I'm way off with that one. All right. 2 weeks later, another reference appeared in the Yarmouth Light, which may be related to the Crawford's disappearance. The paper reported that a body washed ashore near Chebogue Point. It was so badly decomposed that an identification of the body was impossible. The man was well built and had good physical stature. No reference was made to race. A thorough check of John Doe's at Sweeney's Funeral Home in Yarmouth has shown that this body was never turned into their facilities for formal burial preparations. What happened to the body is also a mystery. Could this have been the body of Asa Crawford? 81 years later, some residents still recall the story, and many seem to favor the theory that the crewmen of the French vessel. If this theory is correct, that could explain why the case went unsolved. The crewmen left port with the body and probably never returned to Yarmouth. If they were young men, they probably met their end, as did thousands of their fellow crewmen on the field of battle in France during the First World War. As for Asa Crawford, his case is unsolved and will probably remain that way for many years to come, perhaps forever. Alrighty. Next. Love the artwork. Oh yeah, I never got a close-up of Ash's artwork. Or the French crew. I'm confused about the legs. Whose leg is that? Is it his? Why is it sticking out? Anyway. Here we go. The unexplained death of James Atcheson? We'll go with that. Yarmouth Town, September 12th, 1912, the same year as Asa. James Atcheson was a well-known resident of Yarmouth in 1912. On September 12th of the same year, he was found shortly after 1 p.m. face down on a pile of shingles on Lewis Wharf. He had apparently been dead for some hours. The cause of death was a mystery, but it was suspected that he fell in a fit and had either smothered or had died from exposure. An inquest was held at 4 o'clock before Coroner Perrin with the following as a jury: George Bates, foreman; John W. Bates, Frank Cox, Nathaniel Smith, Charles K. Hatfield, Lloyd Hatfield, Richard Carroll, James Wallace, Captain Can, Dr. Malazon, Charles Middlemass, and Maurice Cohen, Cohen. The following witnesses were examined: James Muse, who found the body, James Atcheson and wife, James MacDonald, and Charles Hatfield. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of death by unknown cause. The deceased had found the sea and had traveled almost 8/4 of the globe for years prior to his death. After returning from the sea, he worked as a painter, and at the time of his death was employed with H.A. Hulsman as a carriage painter. I did the story then? Okay. Alright, we'll do one more. The shooting of Wilfred Frotten, October 18th, 1932. On the morning of Tuesday, October 18th, 1932, Willard Frotten tragically died in the woods of English Mills, 10 miles from the village of Quinnen, Yarmouth County. He was on a hunting trip with his cousin, Joe Frotten, and Ramsay Frotten, and a friend, Tom Muse. According to testimony at the trial, Tom, Ramsay, and Wilfred had left Joe at the camp where they were staying while they were out hunting. The three men had sighted and shot a moose. However, it was not immediately killed and did not fall down right away. In hot pursuit of the wounded animal, the men split up, with Tom and Willard going in one direction and leaving Ramsay following on his own. After some time, Ramsay saw the moose's antlers and a part of its body in a thicket. At the trial, there was some discussion as to whether Ramsay actually saw the moose or whether he thought it was a moose, or what he thought was a moose. However, whether or not Ramsay did see the moose, it is of little consequences in the sequence of events that followed. According to the testimony of the eyewitness, Ramsay Frotten fired at the moose and was horrified at the response to his shot. He heard a scream of his wounded cousin, who fell to the ground with a fatal bullet wound to the chest area. Tom Muse, who was with the badly wounded Willard Frotten, immediately tried to help Willard. He quickly learned that he could do nothing, as the gunshot was too extensive and thought it was fatal. he went up to Ramsay, who was nearby. From there, the two men headed towards the nearby river in order to get a canoe. They had planned to find the Williams' father, who was hunting not too far away. Upon hearing the gunshot, Joe Frotten, who was back at camp, left thinking the men had gotten the moose. Joe trampled through the woods for an indefinite amount of time without finding his companions. He then raised his rifle in the air and fired. Joe then heard the moans of the wounded Willard Frotten, who was laying only 10 feet away. Upon his discovery of Willard, Joe Frotten immediately tried to assist Willard. Joe tried to move Willard and told them that he wanted to get him some medical help. Willard, who knew that his wound was fatal, objected to the move and said, "I'm dying. Don't move me. Leave me here to die in peace." Joe, knowing that this was what Willard actually wanted, went towards the river, where he met up with Ramsay and Tom. Joe then sent Ramsay and Tom to find Willard Frotten's father. Joel headed for Quinnen, which was about 10 miles away. Willard Frotten died quietly, alone in the woods that day. John Frotten, Willard's father, and the rest of the hunting party was brought back to the area of the lake where Ramsay and Tom had earlier left from. It took the men about 20 minutes to relocate Willard Frotten, who had died by now. At the trial, it was proven that the bullet had entered Willard's back and left through his chest. The bullet also grazed Willard's heart. According to Dr. S.W. Williamson, the coroner, the wound was undoubtedly fatal. The doctor testified that Willard would probably have died even if he had received prompt medical attention. The coroner's jury consisted of Joe Frotten, foreman, H. Davis, DeVue, Doucette, A. Doucette, E. Doucette, J. Vacon, John Jacquard, F. Muse, Oscar Doucette, H. Jacquard, Maurice Frotten, R. Frotten, and Peter Robichaud. It was led by Dr. Williamson at the coroner's inquest. The Quinnen parish priest, Father Robichaud, testified that he had made the long journey to the woods from Quinnen late in the evening after death had claimed the victim. After a short deliberation, the jury proceeded a verdict of death by accidental shooting based on the evidence presented. Father Robichaud's account, plus the large number of hunting accidents that had occurred that year, resulted in the Nova Scotia Authority General Department demanding an investigation into the accident that claimed Willard Frotten's life. Upon the conclusion of Attorney General's investigation, Ramsay Frotten was charged with manslaughter in the death of Willard Frotten and ordered to stand trial. The local media reported that the charge was merely a technicality. It was suggested that the government was becoming very concerned about the high incidence of similar shooting accidents in Nova Scotia woods. The government felt that many hunters were careless and that such a charge and subsequent trial would alert hunters that wounding or killing a hunter companion was more than a mere accident. As a result, the Attorney General's Department was not going to dismiss this case as easily as the coroner's jury did. Another benefit to having a charge laid was the matter would be put to rest forever. By standing at trial and being found not guilty by using the accidental defense, Ramsay Frotten would not have to fear being charged in the years ahead. The accused appeared before Stipendiary Magistrate Charles S. Pelton, who ordered the accused to be placed on bail as suggested by the Crown Attorney Alvin Chipman. A preliminary hearing was held before Stipendiary Magistrate Pelton on November 10, 1932. During the preliminary hearing, Ramsay Frotten was not represented by defense counsel. Even so, the Crown operated its case with evidence presented by Dr. S.W. Williamson. He told the court that he found the body in Quinnen and determined that Willard Frotten had died from a bullet wound just under his heart. 2 days later, November 12, Potter agreed to represent Ramsay Frotten. Potter asked the court for an adjournment so that he could consider the case and adequately prepare. The adjournment was granted and the case was postponed until Tuesday, November 22nd. When court resumed on that date, it was shown that Ramsay Frotten did in fact see the moose and fire at the moose, but hit Willard Frotten by mistake. This was supported by Dr. Williamson, who told the court that he thought that the bullet found in Frotten could have struck some portion of the moose, continuing its path and had sufficient force to penetrate William Frotten's body, thus causing his death. But the credibility of this was questioned when it was shown that the bullet had passed through Frotten's body and then penetrated a tree a slight distance away from the body of the dead man. Therefore, it was suggested that Dr. Williamson had confused the badly marked bullet as having been passed through the moose first, then through Frotten, rather than hitting the tree after passing through Frotten. At this time, the science of ballistics was in its infancy stage, and thus no expert testimony was held regarding the forensic factors surrounding the bullet's exact path. Tom Muse was standing by Willard Frotten when he was shot. He told the court that after the shooting, the two men were so dazed and frightened by what had happened, they fled towards a nearby lake, leaving the injured man behind. They claimed that they were searching for Joseph Frotten, who was apparently nearby. But in their confused state of mind, they got lost in the woods for an undetermined period of time before they met Joseph Frotten. They claimed that Joseph Frotten took them back to where the body of Willard Frotten was laying. Based on the testimony and evidence, the case finally came to close when Stipendiary Magistrate Pelton dismissed the technicality charge of manslaughter against Ramsay Frotten. Judge Pelton noted that the difference had cleared the air by noting that Ramsay Frotten actually fired at a moose, not at what he thought was a moose. This was very important. In the early trial, it was brought out that Ramsay Frotten shot at a noise or a motion that suggested itself as a moose, when in reality it was Willard Frotten. From the evidence presented, it appeared that Ramsay Frotten actually shot a moose, but he missed the moose, shooting Willard Frotten by mistake. Therefore, the court ruled that there was no negligence on his part. The Attorney General Department was pleased with the decision of the court, and Ramsay Frotten was cleared of blame for all time in the accident and greatly unfortunate death of Willard Frotten. Whew. Let's see now. Okay. I think I know what this is now, but we'll do these little short ones, and then we'll do the sea monster next time, okay? The murder of Jesse Mahar. Waterville, Nova Scotia, 1933. The slaying of the 30-year-old mother of 4 children, attempted suicide of her alleged assailant, had shocked the settlement of Waterville near here into a turmoil. Wednesday night, Mrs. Jessie Mahar lay dead in her home, victim of a single thrust of a 3-inch jackknife blade, and under close police guard at the Western King's Hospital in Berwick. Okay, did I miss a sentence here? Okay. It was Robbie Ferris, her alleged killer, suffering from an apparent self-inflicted knife wound in his neck. The tragedy, one of the most shocking in the history of Kings County, occurred at 3 o'clock Wednesday afternoon in the living room of the Mahar home, less than a quarter mile from Kings County Hospital for the harmless insane, where Ferris was employed as day watchman. His first cousin, Tom Mahar, husband of the slain woman, was night watchman. Oh, I'm too far down. There we go. Jury returns a verdict in death. Wednesday at 10:30 p.m. in the same plain living room where 24 hours before the young matron had given a birthday party for Ferris and her mother-in-law, and where that afternoon she met her death. 12 Waterville men assembled as coroner's jury under Dr. R.O. Bethune, Bethun. They returned a verdict that Jessie Mahar came to her death by knife held in the hands of Robert Ferris, being thrust into her heart. Dr. Hugh McKinnon Berwick testified before the jury that it was practically impossible for Mrs. Mahar's wounds to have been self-inflicted. Ferris is married and is a father of 4 children. He is alleged to have stabbed himself in the neck with the same knife that killed his cousin's wife. Physicians say he will recover. Jealousy theory. Seeking a motivation for the alleged murder and attempted suicide, police investigators were of the opinion that jealousy on the part of Ferris was responsible. At the birthday party, Tuesday evening, Ferris is stated to have become jealous of another man who was calling to Mrs. Mahar. The party broke up quickly enough. However, Ferris returned to take up his duties at the hospital. Owing to the fact that the superintendent was away for the day, Mahar was also working. Sometimes around 3 o'clock, Emerson Pelton, 18, was sitting in the kitchen and the children were playing about when Ferris, according to the evidence of Pelton, opened the door and after standing in the doorway for several seconds, turned into the living room without saying a word. Mrs. Mahar followed, closing the door after her. According to Pelton, he did not hear a sound until between 5 and 10 minutes later, when he heard Mrs. Mahar scream, "Emerson!" Beatrice, 10-year-old daughter of the Mahars, reached the door just one step ahead of Pelton and flung it open. Rushing for aid. Despite the sight that met his eyes, Pelton said Mrs. Mahar was lying on the side of the room nearest the kitchen, while Ferris was stretched out on the furthest side, about 6 feet separating them. Rushing out of the house to secure aid, he told O.L. Ward, who was working on the building a short distance away, that something was wrong at Mahar's. Hastening to the house, Mr. Ward, who followed Pelton to the witness stand, said Mrs. Mahar was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, while Ferris, moaning and weeping, was on his hands and knees, blood streaming from the gash on the side of his throat. Mr. Warden's next move was to speed to the nearest telephone, where he got word to Dr. Bethune at Berwick and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at Kemptville. Returning to the stricken home, he found Ferris in the kitchen on his hands and knees, because the injured man was in danger of striking the stove and table. Because the injured man was in danger of... Oh my goodness. I'm trying to read bad. Because the injured man was in danger of striking the stove and table in his progress around the kitchen, Ward kept him going in a circle until the arrival of Dr. Bether, Constable Cheeseman, that's a name, and George Churchill of the RCMP. Guarded in hospital. After first aid had been admitted to him, Ferris, a remarkably powerful man, despite his slender build, was inclined to put up some kind of a struggle, and as a matter of precaution, he was handcuffed. At the hospital, he was guarded by Constable Churchill and Chief of Police of Berwick. The inquest was held by lamplight in the living room. The jury, summoned by Constable Cheeseman and sworn in by Coroner Bethu, was comprised of P.W. McBride, foreman, Kenneth Wenzel, P.W. Refuse, C.E. Ryan, S.E. Bent, Alvin Gates, W.O. Stedman, Robert Refuse, Clyde Banks, J.L. Little, Ted Gillis, and Charles Wretch. Dr. McKinnon, in his evidence, stated that the death had been instantaneous. And they don't have anything more on that. They don't say how long he was convicted. They don't say if he got jail time. They hung him. Okay. Alright, well that's 30 minutes of really bad reading. I think we'll start off tomorrow with the sea monsters found on Fish Island. I think, spoiler warning, I think this was a beaked whale because they're really weird looking and they're way out to sea and no one ever sees them, especially when they watch out. But I think that's what this is. But yeah, it doesn't have anything more about like the trial or conviction or if he was jailed or hung or what happened with that. So anyway, thanks for stopping by, for listening to really bad reading, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye. Ooh, there we go.